At 5:12 local time, the sea seemed almost too calm. An American aircraft carrier moved through the Strait of Hormuz with measured precision, its enormous gray hull carving a steady line through the narrow passage. On deck, the morning routine was already in motion. Yellow shirt directors signaled with calm, practiced gestures. Crew members checked tie-downs, fuel connections, and launch spacing. Radar systems rotated above the island. The carrier was doing exactly what it had been built to do: hold stability in a region where stability can vanish in an instant. Then the first sign appeared. There was no blast, no dramatic flash, no warning shot across the water. It began as a strange, low acoustic trace detected by one of the destroyers screening ahead of the carrier group. Deep beneath the surface, hidden inside the layered noise of currents, steel, and engine wash, sonar operators picked up a pattern that clearly did not match commercial traffic. Maybe a seabed reflection, maybe a natural distortion. Inside the Combat Information Center, everything changed at once. Voices remained controlled, but the atmosphere sharpened, screens brightened, headsets tightened into place. A sonar supervisor leaned toward his display, isolating the signal, replaying the pattern, filtering out background noise. The trace was faint, yet it had structure, steady propulsion, careful speed control, and the kind of acoustic discipline linked to a submarine crew that knew exactly how to stay hidden. The report moved quickly. Possible submerged contact, narrow bearing, uncertain range, no one panicked, no one needed to. In a carrier strike group, the most dangerous moments are often the quietest ones. The moments when training takes over before fear has a chance to arrive. At 5:14, a second contact appeared. This one came from another direction, picked up not by the same ship, but by a different escort operating on the carrier's outer screen. The geometry was too precise to ignore. Two separate underwater signatures were approaching from different sectors, both controlled, both careful, both avoiding unnecessary exposure. The watch team in CIC no longer treated the situation like an anomaly. Now it looked like the opening phase of a coordinated threat. On the bridge, the carrier's course shifted slightly, not dramatically, but deliberately. A ship of that size does not jerk away. It adjusts. Small helm corrections began changing the formation's posture while keeping flight deck operations steady enough to avoid disruption overhead. From the outside, everything still looked normal. That was exactly the idea. At 5:16, the air wing added another critical piece to the picture. An airborne anti-submarine platform transmitted fresh acoustic data to the strike group. A third submerged source had appeared farther out, deeper in the water column, moving more slowly than the other two. It was not drifting. It was holding position with purpose, as if completing a triangle around the carrier's projected path. 3 contacts, not random, not scattered, coordinated. That realization changed the entire situation. The carrier strike group shifted into a full anti-submarine posture. Escort ships expanded their screen. A helicopter detachment was pushed toward launch readiness. Additional sensors came online. Internal communications tightened into short, clipped exchanges. Every officer in CIC understood the same hard truth at the same moment. A U.S. aircraft carrier was transiting one of the narrowest and most closely watched waterways in the world, while at least 3 possible hostile submarines moved into position below. And still, the carrier kept moving. That was what made the moment so tense. There was no cinematic panic, no visible breakdown, only controlled motion under growing pressure. On the flight deck, sailors continued their work under the morning sun, most of them unaware that far beneath the hull, a silent contest was already unfolding. At 5:18, one of the contacts disappeared. Not weakened, not blurred, gone. For several long seconds, sonar lost the track entirely. In anti-submarine warfare, a submarine that vanishes can be far more dangerous than one that is already detected. A lost contact might mean evasive action. It might also mean a move into a better firing position. No one in CIC needed that explained. Search parameters widened. Bearings were checked again. The escort destroyer closest to the contact's last known position adjusted speed and angle, trying to force a reacquisition. Then, the signature returned. Closer. Not dramatically closer, but close enough to erase any remaining doubt in the room. The contact had changed depth and bearing in a way that suggested planning, not hesitation. It had slipped away, repositioned, and reappeared on a more dangerous line relative to the carrier's track. Whoever was below was not simply watching. They were maneuvering. At 5:20, the first firm assessment moved through the network. The 3 submarines were operating together. That meant the carrier was not dealing with a single prowler testing the perimeter. It was facing a coordinated underwater formation built to compress reaction time, divide defensive focus, and force the strike group into several simultaneous decisions. In waters as narrow and unforgiving as Hormuz, that kind of setup could become critical very quickly. Then came the report that pushed the situation from serious to immediate. One of the escorts detected a short, sharp acoustic event, metallic, pressurized, unmistakably mechanical. It lasted only a moment, nearly swallowed by the water itself, but to trained ears it sounded like the outer door of a torpedo tube opening. No one in CIC raised their voice. They did not have to. In that instant, every man and woman in the room understood exactly what it meant. The time available to react had just collapsed, and somewhere beneath the carrier, the engagement had already begun. At 5:21 local time, the first confirmation came through the sonar net. "Torpedo in the water!" The words came flat and precise, almost emotionless in their delivery. Inside Combat Information Center, no one repeated them. No one asked for clarification. In a U.S. Navy carrier strike group, that phrase means uncertainty is over. Detection has become engagement. The threat is no longer approaching. It has acted. Seconds later, a second track appeared, then a third. The shape of the attack revealed itself all at once. This was not a warning move from a single submarine acting alone. This was coordinated. It was a coordinated underwater trap. 3 Iranian submarines had moved into position along the carrier's projected route and launched from different sectors, forcing the strike group to respond to several deadly threats at once. In the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, that kind of layered attack was meant to compress reaction time and fracture formation discipline. Instead, it produced the opposite effect. The carrier shifted course hard, not wildly, not carelessly, but with the full force of a warship reacting at the edge of survival. The helm answered. Power increased. The massive hull began carving a new path through the narrow channel, throwing white water behind the stern. On the flight deck, sailors felt the change under their boots before many of them understood the reason. Aircraft handlers stopped movement immediately. Crew chiefs secured equipment. The launch cycle froze mid-rhythm as the ship's priority changed from projecting strength to immediate defense. Around the carrier, the escorts reacted even faster. One destroyer surged into a new blocking position, cutting across the carrier's line to build a tougher outer screen. Another widened the formation and activated additional acoustic countermeasures. Decoys were readied. Towed systems were repositioned. Sonar teams shifted from search mode to engagement mode, stripping away every unnecessary layer of noise to keep the incoming weapons separated, identified, and tracked. Inside CIC, the displays no longer showed a possible danger beneath the surface. Now they showed movement. Fast, deliberate, and closing. One torpedo was approaching from the port quarter using a shallow line designed to exploit speed and confusion. Another was coming through deeper water, slower but steadier, the kind of track meant to stay locked even as the target maneuvered. The third was the hardest to resolve, its signature partly masked by the acoustic distortion of Hormuz, but its bearing placed it in the most dangerous position of all, ahead of the carrier's altered course, where even a successful evasive turn might not be enough. The strike group had only seconds to turn layered defense into survival. Torpedo defense, execute. The order moved instantly through the formation. Acoustic decoys hit the water. Countermeasure patterns began. The carrier continued its turn, using speed, wake, and angle to disrupt the firing solutions already calculated below the surface. But a carrier is not a destroyer. It cannot slice through the sea with sudden precision. It moves like a city under power. Every course correction takes time. Every second of delay belongs to the weapon already in the water. That was why the escorts mattered so much. One destroyer drove directly into the space between the nearest torpedo track and the carrier's most exposed sector. It was a harsh calculation, exactly the kind of decision carrier groups prepare for and hope they never have to make. The objective was not heroics. The objective was geometry. Break the angle, force the weapon to choose, pull the seeker away from the largest target in the water and make it commit to the wrong ship in the wrong patch of sea at the wrong moment. For several long seconds, no one in CIC said more than bearing updates and range calls. Then the first sign of disruption appeared. The nearest torpedo wavered. Its track bent slightly off the carrier's line, hesitating as the decoy field and the moving escort complicated its targeting picture. It did not lose contact completely. It adjusted, hunting through noise and wake turbulence, its seeker searching for the strongest acoustic return. But that small deviation was enough to prove the defense was having an effect. Not perfectly, not safely, but enough to buy precious time. The second torpedo remained cleaner. It kept closing through deeper water, resisting the first layer of deception. Sonar teams followed it in near silence, plotting every change in speed and heading while the carrier maintained its evasive turn. On the bridge, the officers understood the same truth as the operators below. Even a near miss at that distance could cripple the flight deck, tear through critical systems, or turn the strait into a full-scale rescue zone. At 5:24, the fight expanded again. An MH-60R Seahawk lifted off from the strike group and raced low over the water toward the nearest submarine contact. Behind it, additional acoustic buoys were prepared for rapid deployment. The mission had now split into two urgent tracks: defeat the torpedoes already in the water and find the firing submarines before they could reset for a second attack. That second danger became immediate almost at once. Fresh sonar data showed that one of the Iranian submarines had changed speed after launch. It was not retreating in panic. It was maneuvering with purpose, likely trying to slip into the acoustic clutter of the strait or set conditions for another firing pass. That meant the situation was still unfolding. The first salvo was not the end of the threat. It was only the opening phase. Then another call cut through CIC. One torpedo had been diverted, not destroyed, diverted. It was no longer tracking the carrier directly. Now it was angling toward the escort screen. For the strike group, that was both relief and warning. The countermeasures had disrupted the original kill chain, but the weapon was still active, still armed, and now moving toward one of the ships shielding the carrier. To protect the flagship, another vessel might have to remain inside the danger zone. No one lost discipline. The escort held its course. The carrier kept turning. The Seahawk continued outbound, and below the surface, at least one more torpedo was still running, fast, unseen, and closing on the water just ahead of the carrier's bow. At 5:25 local time, the final incoming torpedo was still active. It was moving fast through the confined water ahead of the carrier's bow, cutting through layers of wake, countermeasure noise, and distorted echoes from the seabed of the Strait of Hormuz. One weapon had already been pulled away toward the escort screen. Another had lost enough stability to give the strike group a few more seconds. But this one remained the immediate threat, steady, controlled, and still tracking the largest target in the formation. Inside the Combat Information Center, every screen fed into the same calculation. Bearing, speed, angle, predicted intercept. No one wasted a word. The moment had moved beyond alarm. This was now a precise contest of timing and geometry, measured in seconds and fractions of a degree. The carrier continued its evasive turn, pushing as hard as its massive propulsion system allowed. White water surged behind the stern. The wake widened. The ship's angle shifted just enough to complicate the torpedo's final approach, but not enough to guarantee anything. There were no guarantees left. Around it, the escort stayed fully engaged. Sonar teams remained locked onto the weapon. Countermeasure operators added more layers of deception into the water. One destroyer on the outer screen adjusted its course again, using its own movement and acoustic footprint to distort the environment between the torpedo and the carrier. Above the surface, an MH-60R Seahawk raced low over the sea, already deploying its first pattern of sonobuoys near the last known position of the nearest submarine. Then, at 5:26, something changed. The torpedo faltered. It didn't stop, it didn't disappear, but its track shifted slightly off the carrier's bow. So small at first, it was almost unnoticeable. A few seconds passed. The deviation increased. The weapon had entered the decoy field and begun following a false signal through noise, turbulence, and shifting echoes. For the operators in CIC, that small change was enough. The carrier had made it through the first wave. There were no celebrations. No one stepped back, because the threat had changed shape. It was no longer just the weapons already in the water. Now it was the submarines. In that instant, the entire posture of the strike group shifted. Defense transitioned into pursuit. The objective was no longer simply to evade. It was to locate the 3 Iranian submarines before they could disappear into the strait, reset, and attempt another strike. The Seahawk reached its first search area and began laying down a dense sonobuoy pattern. One after another, the buoys hit the water and activated, building a fresh underwater picture in real time. Back in CIC, new data streams merged with reports from the escort destroyers. The strike group was no longer reacting blindly. It was assembling a structured picture of the underwater environment. At 5:28, the first clear pattern emerged. The submarine that had disappeared earlier, the one that had slipped off sonar and reappeared closer, was now moving again, and faster. Its acoustic signature was still controlled, but no longer perfectly clean. To experienced analysts, that mattered. It suggested a crew under pressure, changing depth and speed more aggressively than before. Whether it was repositioning or attempting to break contact, the result was the same. Movement made it easier to track. A second contact remained nearly motionless, deep and close to the seabed, blending into the acoustic clutter. It was the most patient of the 3, holding position with deliberate restraint. That made it dangerous, but for the moment, less urgent than the one actively maneuvering. The third submarine was the most aggressive. After launch, it had accelerated and was now arcing wide beneath the surface, moving along the outer edge of the engagement zone. Its path suggested an attempt to regain a firing angle on the carrier. That made it the highest priority target. It wasn't withdrawing, it was setting up again. The strike group reacted immediately. One escort shifted from passive tracking to active sonar, sending sharp pulses through the water despite revealing its own position. Stealth was no longer the priority. Pressure was. active sonar forces decisions. A submarine must either hold its course and risk precise localization, or maneuver and expose itself through movement. The response came quickly. The aggressive contact reacted. Its speed changed, its bearing shifted, and for the first time since the encounter began, its movement aligned clearly across multiple sensors, allowing the strike group to build a stable tracking solution. Contact solution solidifying. The words moved through CIC with the same calm precision as every other report that morning. Still no raised voices, only process. The Seahawk adjusted its course. Another pattern of sonobuoys splashed into the water ahead of the submarine's projected path. The destroyer maintaining active sonar kept the pressure on. A second escort moved to close the gap from the flank. The geometry had shifted. For the first time in the encounter, the submarine was no longer shaping the situation. The strike group was. At 5:31, the MH-60R made its move. Flying low and fast, the helicopter aligned over the projected intercept zone. In the rear cabin, the crew had already merged the sonobuoy data with shipboard tracking and narrowed the target window. The release was calm, procedural, almost mechanical. There was no dramatic pause. A lightweight anti-submarine torpedo dropped cleanly into the sea and vanished beneath the surface. Then everyone waited. On the destroyers inside CIC and in the helicopter overhead, the same silence settled in. Seconds stretched painfully as the weapon entered the water and began searching on its own. Beneath the surface, the submarine tried to break away, changing depth sharply and shifting bearing once again. But the net around it was tightening. Active sonar pressed from one side, passive buoys tracked from above, and escort ships fed every update into the same tactical picture. Then the sea responded. A deep underwater detonation rolled through the strait. Not a blast above the surface, not a burst of flame, but a heavy submerged Uda-like shock that traveled through hulls and sonar arrays alike. For one suspended instant, the entire contact picture dissolved into noise. No one spoke. All eyes stayed on the screens. The aggressive submarine's signature did not fully return. What appeared instead was fragmented, unstable, and drifting away from its previous track. It was not a confirmed kill, not yet, but it was enough to shift the balance of the fight. One Iranian submarine had likely been hit, or at the very least forced badly out of position. The second was still hiding deep. The third was still somewhere below, but none of them were shaping the engagement anymore. Now they were the ones being hunted, and in the Strait of Hormuz, the trap had just reversed. At 5:32 local time, the battle changed form. For the first 20 minutes of the engagement, the three Iranian submarines had controlled the tempo from below. They had chosen the angles. They had used silence, compression, and surprise to force a U.S. carrier strike group into rapid defensive action inside one of the most confined maritime choke points on Earth. But now the balance was shifting. The strike group was no longer reacting. It was closing the net. Inside Combat Information Center, the tactical display had transformed from a defensive picture into a coordinated anti-submarine hunt. The previously aggressive submarine, the one that had maneuvered hardest after the torpedo launch and drawn the first counterattack, was no longer moving with the same discipline. After the underwater detonation, its signature returned only in fragments. Acoustic analysts tracked scattered noise, irregular cavitation, and a loss of control consistent with damage, disorientation, or both. No one rushed to call it finished. That was not how the Navy worked in water like this, and not against submarines. But the assessment was clear enough. One of the attacking boats had been damaged badly enough to stop influencing the battle. That was the opening the strike group needed. The escort destroyers tightened their pattern around the carrier, not by crowding closer, but by expanding into a more deliberate kill geometry. One ship stayed forward and aggressive, using active sonar to force the underwater picture into the open. Another shifted to the flank, denying an escape route through the acoustic clutter of merchant traffic and bottom reverberation. Above them, the MH-60R Seahawk continued circling low, its sensors and sonobuoys turning the water into a mapped field of pressure and probability. At the center of it all, the carrier kept moving. That mattered. The carrier was still the primary target, still the most valuable ship in the formation, still the vessel the submarines had come to destroy. Yet even under direct attack, it had not stopped functioning as the core of the combat system. Flight deck operations remained locked in a defensive posture, but command, control, and coordination continued without visible disruption. The escorts were able to hunt because the carrier had survived long enough to keep the formation intact. At 5:35, the first decisive sign appeared. It was not dramatic, not from a distance. One of the escorts reported a faint oil sheen spreading across a patch of water near the last known position of the damaged submarine. A moment later, another lookout spotted tiny fragments rising and dispersing with the current. Nothing theatrical, nothing large enough for cameras, but enough for professionals to understand what it suggested. Something below had broken apart. Inside CIC, the label was updated, probable kill. That single assessment did not make the situation safer. It made it sharper, because if one submarine had been lost or crippled, the remaining two now understood exactly what they were facing. The carrier strike group had survived the ambush. It had rebuilt its sensor picture, and now it was pushing back with the layered coordination that makes anti-submarine warfare so dangerous once momentum shifts. At 5:37, the second submarine finally gave itself away. For most of the fight, it had stayed low and nearly motionless, using the seafloor and background clutter to avoid precise localization. It had been the quietest of the three, the most disciplined in concealment. But concealment under pressure is fragile. With active sonar forcing decisions and sonobuoy patterns tightening the search box, even stillness could become a signal. A slight depth change, a trim correction, a tiny acoustic irregularity where nothing should have changed at all. That was enough. The nearest destroyer caught the anomaly first. Seconds later, the Seahawk confirmed it from above. Two separate data streams aligned. What had looked like empty water was now a valid target track. The response came immediately, but with control. No one fired blindly. No one gambled. The strike group refined the contact for several more seconds, keeping the submarine boxed in while preserving separation from merchant traffic and friendly ships. In the Strait of Hormuz, every shot had to be exact. A mistake in waters like these could create chaos almost as dangerous as the threat itself. Then the order came. The helicopter repositioned over the projected intercept point and committed to the attack. Another lightweight anti-submarine torpedo entered the water and began hunting downward through the layered sound field. The destroyer kept active pressure on one side, denying the submarine any clean route out. At the center of the formation, the carrier held its course just long enough to preserve the tactical geometry. Beneath the surface, the Iranian submarine finally made a hard move. For the first time since the ambush began, its signature flared. Cavitation increased. Its bearing shifted sharply. It was no longer hiding. Now it was running. But in confined water, running can become a trap of its own. The harder the submarine maneuvered, the clearer its track became. And the clearer its track became, the tighter the firing solution closed around it. The Seahawk crew watched the data come together. Operators in CIC followed every movement across their displays. On the destroyers, sonar teams stayed locked in, calling out updates with cold precision. Then the water answered again. A second underwater detonation rolled through the strait, heavier than the first, sharper, and closer to the projected target position. Sonar returns shattered into noise. For several long seconds, the engagement zone turned into a wall of acoustic chaos. When the picture began to clear, the second submarine was gone. Not fading, not masked, gone. No coherent propulsion trace returned. No evasive turn emerged from the noise. No disciplined contact reappeared beyond the blast field. This time, CIC did not hesitate. Confirmed neutralization. But the room did not relax. One submarine was still out there. One Iranian boat remained unaccounted for beneath the waters of Hormuz. It could have been withdrawing, it could have been silent and damaged. Or it could have been doing something even more dangerous, sliding into the only position still left that mattered, one more shot at the carrier. And as the strike group tightened its formation for the final search, everyone inside Combat Information Center understood the same hard truth. The battle was not over. The last submarine had the greatest freedom to be patient, and under the surface, patience can be the most dangerous weapon of all. At 5:41 local time, the Strait of Hormuz went quiet. Not peaceful, not secure. Quiet in the way a battlefield turns quiet when one side has already struck, the other has survived, and something dangerous still remains hidden below. Two Iranian submarines had already been taken out of the fight, one marked as a probable destruction, the other confirmed destroyed. But the third boat had vanished into the underwater confusion at the exact moment the strike group needed certainty most. Inside CIC, no one mistook silence for victory. The carrier continued forward under escort, its massive hull still driving through the narrow channel with deliberate force. On the flight deck, operations remained restrained. Sailors moved with the same discipline they had shown from the start. But the atmosphere had changed. The ship had endured an attack from below and remained standing. Now, every step across steel and non-skid carried the weight of unfinished business, because somewhere in the water, one submarine was still missing from the picture. At 5:42, the strike group shifted from attack geometry to containment geometry. The escorts tightened the screen around the carrier, not by collapsing inward, but by reshaping the outer escape lanes into controlled kill corridors. One destroyer maintained active sonar on a rotating pattern. Another covered the flank where the last submarine was most likely to slip toward deeper acoustic clutter. The MH-60R Seahawk, still flying low over the sea, expanded its sonobuoy field and began building overlapping search boxes ahead of the carrier's track. This was no longer a reaction to an incoming weapon. It was a measured hunt for a surviving predator. The operators in CIC understood the danger of this phase. A damaged submarine might run. A disciplined submarine might stay motionless. But a patient submarine, one that understood it no longer had partners, no longer had surprise, and no longer had control of the battle, might attempt the most dangerous move left. Wait for the carrier to settle, then strike once more from a tighter angle. That was why the search could not become reckless. The strike group did not rush forward blindly, and it did not sink into false confidence after 2 successful counterattacks. It held pressure, it held structure. Every sensor stayed in the fight. Every ship in the screen operated as part of a single tactical organism, feeding data, refining bearings, and stripping false returns from the underwater picture, one layer at a time. Then the last submarine made a mistake. It was a small one, not a sudden burst of speed, not a panicked turn, just a slight acoustic irregularity in a place where silence had held a little too perfectly. A brief change in propeller rhythm. A tiny correction in depth. A faint disturbance in the sound field that should not have been there at all. One destroyer caught it first. Seconds later, the Seahawk's buoy pattern touched the same anomaly from above. 2 independent streams aligned. What had been empty water became a possibility, then a contact, then a track. Inside CIC, the tactical picture sharpened with brutal speed. The bearing held. The movement was real. The last Iranian submarine was not outside the fight. It was still inside it, sliding slowly across the forward edge of the carrier's corridor, almost certainly trying to find one final firing line before disappearing into the layered clutter of Hormuz. That was the moment the entire battle turned, because the last submarine was no longer facing a single ship. It was facing the full architecture of a U.S. Navy carrier strike group that had already absorbed the first strike and had now fused every working sensor into one coherent chain of response. At 5:45, the strike group did not rush the shot. That restraint was the difference between drama and professionalism. The contact was held, refined, and boxed in. The destroyers preserved their spacing to avoid crossing friendly lines. The helicopter adjusted its position to keep the submarine under pressure without forcing an early release. The carrier maintained enough course stability to keep the tactical geometry intact. Every platform in the group played its role, and no platform acted alone. The submarine tried to slip deeper. Then it eased off bearing. Then it corrected again. Perhaps it had sensed that the net around it was no longer built from guesses. It was too late. At 5:47, the Seahawk moved into attack position. From the air, the crew had the clearest tactical picture of the engagement since the ambush began. Sonobuoy data, destroyer sonar returns, and the submarine's last movement all converged into a single intercept box. The release was calm, procedural, and final. A lightweight anti-submarine torpedo dropped from the helicopter, struck the sea, and disappeared beneath the surface. Then the Strait waited. Every operator in CIC watched the same display. Every escort held the same tense silence. Every second stretched longer than the one before it. Below the surface, the last submarine reacted exactly as trapped submarines often do when the net closes too late for a clean escape. It maneuvered sharply, changed depth, and tried to outrun the geometry already built around it. But once that geometry is lost, it is rarely recovered under pressure. The destroyer on the flank maintained active contact. The sonobuoys held the track. The torpedo closed. Then the water answered for the final time. A deep underwater detonation rolled through the Strait of Hormuz, heavier than anything the carrier's crew had felt since the encounter began. The sea above it shuddered. Sonar returns collapsed into noise. For several long seconds, the underwater picture dissolved into chaos. Then it cleared. No propulsion signature returned. No disciplined acoustic trace reappeared beyond the blast field. No second movement emerged from the contact's last position. Inside CIC, the conclusion was reached the same way every critical conclusion had been reached that morning. Not with emotion, but with evidence. The last submarine was no longer a threat. Only then did the battle truly end. By 5:50, the carrier was still moving. Its deck remained intact. Its command structure had never broken. Its escorts were still in formation. The ambush that had begun with 3 Iranian submarines closing beneath an American aircraft carrier had ended with the strike group still alive, still organized, and still in control of the strait. No speeches followed. No celebration broke discipline. The lesson did not need to be spoken aloud. 3 submarines had entered Hormuz to destroy a U.S. aircraft carrier, but they had not faced a single ship. They had faced a system. And that system had stayed in the fight to the very end.